To understand how plants came to be and the various groups, we must first discuss the life cycle strategies that exist amongst organisms. Most living organisms are either haplontic or diplontic. The terminology here refers to the vast majority of their cell type. Haplontic organisms spend most of their life cycle in the haploid cell type, meaning that they prioritize reproduction. Diplontic organisms spend the predominant time of their life cycle prioritizing themselves. So their life cycle is all about growing them as an individual and then having brief moments where they sexually reproduce. Plants are unique in that they are the only organism that has near even distribution of haploid and diploid states. Well, key features include the fact that they are often multicellular. All plants can conduct some photosynthesis. All plants have a cell wall that contains cellulose, and that very specific haplodiplontic life cycle strategy is unique to plants. We also refer to this as the alteration or alternation of generations in subsequent texts. So again, we can see here that plants spend half their life mitotically reproducing to grow a large organism, and then mitotically reproducing to create gametes. You might recall that a number of the algae, brown, red, golgi, are a part of the protist kingdom. But as we move forward, the plant groups, the ones that became separate into this new kingdom, they evolved some very unique adaptations that set them apart. The first group are the bryophytes. These are the simplest land plants. They're also known as the non-vascular plants because they have no roots, no leaves, no stems. They have no essentially circulatory system for a plant. And therefore, they must live in or closely associated with bodies of water. Because of this close association with water, one of their unique features is that their sperm have flagella and are able to swim. The bryophytes can be further divided into three groups: liverworts, hornworts, and mosses. Liverworts have the ability to take up water over their entire surface. They're one of the most oldest and ancestral plants. They have consistently open pores. They've got no cuticle to hold in the water and no stomata to close those pores up. The hornworts were the first to evolve a stomata, in which case they could open and take up water over their surface, but also close those pores to minimize water loss. And then the mosses came with early, very primitive root structures. These were more like rhizoids, similar to our fungal counterparts. The next group are the tracheophytes. These were the first plants to have a vascular system. So they had roots, full stems. The tracheophytes are broken down into two groups: the lycophytes, whose key feature is the fact that every member are evergreen, meaning they do not drop their leaves seasonally. The second group were the monilophytes, and this could be further divided into three groups: horsetails, whisk-ferns, and true ferns. Know the key feature here. Horsetails were the first to have joints and segments, and so these were the precursor to branches. Whisk-ferns took a step back in evolution. They lost roots and leaves. This is an important thing to point out because we often think that evolution is a subsequent journey to become better, stronger, faster, smarter, survival of the fittest. But mutations are random, and some mutations are detrimental. And if you can still survive and reproduce, those mutations can become fixed and maintained in the environment. Such was the case of whisk-ferns. They lost roots, they lost leaves, but they maintained those long stems, and so they persisted. The last group are the true ferns, and these were the first to exhibit adventitious roots, those roots that come from any other part of the plant not related to anchoring below the ground surface. The third group were the gymnosperms. Now, to these vascular plants, we added the evolutionary adaptation of seeds. Gymnosperms were also the first trees to exhibit gender. Gymnosperms can be described as monoecious or dioecious, depending upon their body structure. Monoecious, mono meaning one, it means that we've got two genders housed in one body. It is a more scientifically accurate term for a hermaphrodite. Dioecious, that di, pair of two, means that there are two separate bodies, each with their own standalone gender. And so gymnosperms were the first to have male plants and female plants. One of the reasons why we talk about gymnosperms is because of all the different trees. This is by far the one with the most diversity, the greatest number of species. And within the gymnosperms, the conifers are the most varied of all plants. Conifers range from 5,000 years old to brand new saplings. They can be 360 feet tall or miniature dwarf bonsais. A lot of variation here. But the key feature amongst conifers is that they produce resin. Resin is not sap. Sap is a sugar water, like you would use to make maple syrup. Resin, on the other hand, is a very viscous, clear substance. It's actually part of the plant's immune system. It has aromatic properties, antiseptic properties. It can kill and inhibit fungal growth and deter insect attacks. When we think about amber and Jurassic Park, that's fossilized resin. It comes about in response to a tree's wound response. Now, this resin is very, very sticky, and the idea is it's supposed to create almost a clot on that damage to the plant. It also is very flammable. And so the second key thing about conifers is that they have a very unique life cycle that depends upon fire. If you drive around and you see a coniferous forest, one thing you might note is that the entire forest seems to belong to one, maybe three species. It's almost like a copy-paste across the breadth of that landscape. And the reason for this is because conifers produce very flammable resin, and they themselves are largely fire resistant. And so what happens is during hot and dry summers, lightning strikes might create natural fire, and this will clear the understory below the coniferous trees, removing shrubs and brush and grasses, creating very fertile ground. Also, the fire helps crack the pine cones to release seeds and stimulate germination. As a result, we see these coniferous forests. Very few species of trees can survive there long term. In terms of human interaction, conifers are also very important because they are ornamental, they create windbreaks, and they are our primary source for lumber. Another group of gymnosperms are the cycads. The reason why I wanted to highlight this one was this was the first subgroup to have dioecious plants. If it looks like there's something out of Jurassic Park, it's because they are from the Jurassic period. They are very ancient plants. And it takes a very discerning eye to tell the difference between the males versus females. Another gymnosperm subgroup is the ginkgos. The important thing to point out here is that they have a very unique shaped leaf. It's the only plant with a leaf of this kind. And another interesting thing about them is that ginkgos are very resistant to pollution and fungal attack. They're on a special list for future recolonization efforts in the event that we face an Armageddon or move to Europa, a moon around Jupiter or Mars. One of the plants we would take with us is ginkgos to help cleanse the air because they're much more efficient at it. The last group of gymnosperms that I wanted to highlight were the gonadophytes. This subgroup has three different groups: the ephedras, the Gonadiaceae, and the Wilwitziaceae. I won't ask you to spell these moving forward, but the point that I wanted to make here is that all of these are relict species. These are a very limited number of surviving species from an otherwise extinct group. Cool thing about the ephedras is that their entire stems are photosynthetic, not just their leaves. This is very unique. The Gonadiaceae, these were the first plants to be insect pollinated, and there's only one Wilwitziaceae left alive, and that's the picture on the bottom right corner. Our last group of plants are the angiosperms. These are not only vascular plants, they not only have seeds, but more importantly, they have flowers. Angio means vessel, and so this refers to the fact that these have ovaries. The angiosperms are characterized by having three F's. Know these three. The first is that they produce flowers. The second is that those flowers will become fruit. And the third is that out of all the living organisms, only angiosperms exhibit double fertilization. Everything else, it's one sperm and one egg. But angiosperms, it's one egg to two sperms. But we'll talk about this more when we hit reproduction. The rise of the angiosperms began about 140 million years ago. It sparked one of the most dramatic biological revolutions, and they are by far the most dominant plant type left on our planet. They come in a variety of colors, shapes, sizes, and forms. And so in science, it's important to be able to dichotomously break them down, to subgroup them. And so we do. We divide the angiosperms into monocots versus eudicots. Know the difference between these two. Monocots get their name because within the seed pod, there's one cotyledon. It's a very specialized leaf that has super photosynthesizing power. It's not a true leaf, and so it's only there for the first few weeks after the seedling sprouts. Dicots get their name because they have two of these cotyledon leaves. And so this is one of the reasons why if you plant seeds and you're watching them germinate and sprout up, within the first 3 to 6 weeks of life, it doesn't matter if you've got cucumbers or tomatoes or rosemary, they all almost look the same. They either have one sprouted leaf or two sprouted leaves. This is the monocot versus dicot, or eudicot in its Latin formal terms. Another difference is that the organization of the xylem and phloems are different. In the roots, monocots and exhibit a ring-like structure, while the dicots have an X shape right in the center. This organization is different in the stems above ground. The monocots there have a very scattered, almost randomly assorted bundles of the vascular tissue, whereas the dicots now have a ring. One of the big telltales, though, are the veins in the leaves and the petals in the flowers. Monocots all exhibit parallel veins in the leaf, running the length of the leaf, whereas dicots have a netted pattern, all stemming from a single source. The monocot flowers, the petals all occur in multiples of 3, 6, 9, whereas the dicot flowers have multiples of 4 or 5. Unable to escape, plants must resist predation in other ways. Plants have to resist predation or changes in the environment in unique ways. Sometimes this can involve anatomical structures, physical features that might discourage an herbivore from eating it. Spines, prickles, thorns are going to come at a cost if something's trying to chew or bite or nestle into that plant. Another way plants can survive is through chemical features and enhanced symbioses, relationships with other organisms like ants and bacteria. It's not uncommon for a plant to provide a home or shelter for a particular organism, in this case the ants, and rely upon the territorial nature of the ants to drive away other predators or competitors. Palm frond spines, for example, carry pathogenic bacteria that infect the wounds of species that are trying to chew on them or breaking their branches. And this can provide a long-lasting reminder to the mammal that this is not the plant to ingest. Other chemical structures that are secreted can also deter organisms from subsequently feeding on the plant. So it's important to point out here that there are primary and secondary metabolites. Primary metabolites are those first order of business things that a plant absolutely needs to function. Secondary metabolites are those that would be nice, but they're not the first order of business. Okay? Across all plants, the primary metabolites are shared. They need to be able to gain access to water. They have to be able to photosynthesize. They have to be able to generate ATP to make sugar, starch, cellulose. And these are essential for a plant to live. Secondary features or metabolites are those things that are unique to individual plants. They are defenses that would be nice, but not necessary. If you have them, you have a selective edge, but it's not required. So some examples here. Tannins are secreted by a large number of plants, and they create a very woody, oaky taste. You might be familiar with tannins if you've ever drunken wine or had whiskey aged in oak barrel. It creates the bitterness there. Tannins are also used to cure leather. This chemical compound creates covalent bonds that bond to proteins, and so it interferes with digestion. An animal that ate something with high tannins would have a very upset stomach for a time, and so first time they get to have a meal, the second time they're going to think twice about eating that same plant. Alkaloids are bitter. They become a taste deterrent. So a good example of an alkaloid is coffee. Coffee is very bitter, and there are very few animals that like to ingest the coffee fruit, coffee pods. On the whole, coffee is really only ingestible to humans because we first roast the beans, and this breaks down a lot of those alkaloid agents. Cyanogenic glycosides, like the one that we're seeing in this foxglove plant on the far right, they slow down your cellular respiration. They make it hard for you to breathe. And so an animal who has ingested this is probably not going to go back for a second time. And then I also included the leaves of the marijuana plant. And the idea here is the THC found in those leaves and buds are going to cause disorientation to the mammals. And so this is going to decrease their likelihood of coming back and finding that same plant in the future, or at least slow them down so they don't eat too many of these leaves. Now, while these chemicals were created and maintained because they provided a selective edge, a means to survive, these chemicals can also be used for humans and have medicinal purposes. Aspirin comes from the bark of the willow and the aspen. Many indigenous tribes would chew the bark to release this naturally occurring fever reducer. Foxglove also produces digitalin, which slows the heart rate and acts as a blood thinner. Ipecac comes from the ipecacuah tree, and it induces vomiting. It's really good for getting out a toxin or food poisoning issues. So we've learned a lot from our ancestors based upon the natural world around us, and from here have been able to synthesize synthetic versions or more purified versions of these for over-the-counter distribution. The structural and physiological systems of the plant has enabled it to be the dominant life form on our planet. The picture here shows the vast variety and diversity of plants compared to fungi, bacteria, arthropods, even humans. So let's take each of these in turn. Focus on the structure and the function. Remember that form often dictates function. So the roots, these are the generally underground, and it's important to point out that as above, so below. The root structure is often equal in size to the shoot system above. It needs to be, because the root's primary function is to anchor the plant. You can't hold something huge and top heavy on a measly little tether. The other structure or function of roots is to absorb water and minerals through osmosis. The big significance of having roots meant that plants could now move away from water bodies. The tracheophytes didn't have to be submerged in water or next to the river. They could move farther away and trust that their roots would find groundwater sources deep below them. The next structure are shoots. These are the above ground components. They're often referred to as stems or branches. They provide structural integrity, but more importantly, they house the vascular network. They allow plants to transport water from down below throughout the entire plant structure, and the sugars from photosynthesis from up high, where the leaves are, down throughout the plant. Without shoots, plants would not be able to grow up. And they're so effective at this that some plants are close to 400 feet tall. Plants without vascular networks, without shoots, are very short and shriveled and rely upon the structural integrity of their surface to live upon. The next structure are leaves. They're above ground, often at the very ends of branches. They tend to be green, but this is not the sole color that they can be. It's important to point out that there are essentially two types of leaves. There are the evergreen leaf that gets its name from being forever green. They stay green year round. These are the trees that maintain their leaves during winter. And the second type of leaf is the deciduous leaf. These belong to trees that exhibit seasonal changes. They're barren in the winter. They exhibit small green shoots in the spring, vibrant green in the summer, and come fall, they're going to change colors: gold, red, brown, purple, and then fall again. All leaves, regardless of their color, function to maximize photosynthesis. And so they have evolved special adaptations in shape, in size, in form, in number, to ensure that each leaf has access to the sun to maximize this potential. It costs a lot of energy to make a leaf and maintain it. And so each one must pull their weight and contribute to the ATP acquisition and the sugar generation to be maintained. The next structure are seeds. They can occur off the branches or be nestled within fruit. These are specialized structures that are key for dispersal. One of the interesting things about plants is that you can look at a plant and tell its life history. You can tell whether it's an inbreeder, an outbreeder, whether it's a monocot or a dicot, what environment it's native to, someplace with lots of water, someplace with limited water. You can look at the seeds and tell how they travel. Does it look like it will be airborne? Does it have a lot of prickly things that will get stuck to an animal? Is it nestled in something delicious and therefore traveling within an organism? Is it buoyant, and will it be moved by water? One of the key structures within the seed is the endosperm. The nourishment for the original shoot comes from within the seed, is meant to provide nourishment for that seedling until it breaches the soil surface, until it can breach the canopy and get sunlight on its own. And that seed is also composed of a seed coat, a waterproof protective structure that's meant to keep the seed safe. Altogether, seeds allow these next generation plants to survive for extended periods of time. The average lifespan of a seed is approximately 7 years. The nutrient store is very beneficial because it'll ensure that the seed can wait for its time in the sun. It also allows for a means of dispersal. And altogether, this means that plants have a mechanism for moving to decrease competition, because you don't want your offspring to then be competing with you as the parent for the same resources. Next on our list of structures are the flowers. They occur off branches, usually close to leaves. They come in a wide variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. Regardless of their diversity, all flowers are meant to advertise for pollinators, to get assistance with pollination, whether that be a living organism or wind, rain, other mechanisms. By having flowers and sexual reproduction, plants were able to dominate our planet. A flower that is pollinated will become a fruit. And so we can see in the diagram here that the flower is starting to swell at its base, and that's becoming the fruit structure there. What is the benefit of fruit? Well, for one, it's protective. The second is it's very tasty. And so this is going to endorse dispersal and help that plant move and minimize competition.